We turn now to AI itself and to a simple but urgent question. Who is it really being built for, and who built it? I'm delighted to invite to the stage Dr. Katie Evans to introduce us to the next panel.
Hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Katie Evans. I have the pleasure of working for the IEEE, but I'm also a philosopher. And so it's between these two worlds of policy making and standard setting and deep philosophical inquiry that I want to situate the panel today. I'd like to thank the sponsors and the organizers of this wonderful conference, and also the translators who have been working very, very hard to facilitate a wonderful and inspiring conversation. But I'm looking around the room right now and I'm wondering, are we really inspired? It's 6 o'clock, day 2 of a long, long conference. And I'm thinking the only way we're gonna get through this last leg of it is with a little bit of audience participation. I'm so sorry. I'm not gonna make you dance. I'm not gonna make you sing. You don't even have to stand up, but you're gonna have to answer some questions. So to start, could you please raise your hand if you speak more than one language? Oh, wow. Welcome to Europe. 2 languages? Keep them up if it's true. 3 languages? 4 languages? Oh, big drop off. 5 languages? 6 languages? 7? I mean, come on, 7? Okay, let's give this wonderful woman a round of applause. Okay, impressive stuff. Now, raise your hand if you've lived in more than one country. I'm not going to do the numbers again, don't worry. Okay, and maybe raise your hand if you've worked closely with, or why not, it's the weekend, you've fallen in love with someone from a different culture. See, we have so much in common, don't we? So I don't have to tell you then that human experience is incredibly diverse, and the ways that we relate to one another and the world are myriad, complex, surprising, and occasionally frustrating. So I shouldn't have to argue much to say that AI, whatever it does and whatever it will do, probably should try to take this type of diversity into account, right? But there's a problem. My last question. Who here has already been or watched a panel on something like diversity in AI? Already done something about inclusivity, diversity, you know, equity, these sorts of things. Okay, so for those of you that haven't, buddy up, right? Help each other through it. But then I shouldn't have to explain the basics here. You've already heard things like inclusive participation, stakeholder consultation, data representativeness, iterative impact assessments to make the whole thing work. And this was, you know, it's still important, but it also harkens to an era of AI that was mostly about telling the difference between cats and dogs and recommending music. It's maybe not equipped to handle the all-encompassing do-it-all machines that we're deploying right now at a civilizational scale. Right? So it behooves us maybe to dig into something a little bit deeper now when we're facing the types of capable and sometimes scary models that we see today. And so this is sort of the lead theme that I want to introduce for the panel, this deeper diversity and difference, which I will call paradigmatic diversity. And some examples of what I mean by that you'll all know firsthand, and I've proven it, are things like how the language you speak permits you or not to entertain certain notions about concepts like agency, value, or technology itself, right? Or what you even mean when you say something like progress. Are we all actually marching in the same direction? Maybe not, right? Or what ends technology serves. There's many, many more that we're going to talk about on this panel. I don't want to preempt the views. But I do want to keep us accountable to this deeper line of thinking. And so I'm going to need the audience to do one more thing for me. And that is, each time that we say the word diversity on this stage for the next 40 minutes, I need you to snap. Okay? So let's try it. I'm going to say, the most important thing in the future of AI is diversity. Ah, beautiful. Okay, why am I asking you to do that? Firstly, pure mechanism for audience participation, okay? I want to keep you alive through this evening. Secondly, it's exactly the placeholder term that I totally want to avoid in this conversation, because exactly what we mean is what I want to get to. And maybe if I want to be more cheeky, lastly, this term and terms similar to it have become ostracized and defunded in AI research and policy lately, so it would suit us to get used to the idea of talking about this topic without actually calling it by its name. But that's enough of an introduction. So with that, I see my panelists are raring to go. So instead of introducing them by their titles and names, which you can see here, I'd like to introduce them according to their answer to the following question. Who are the people AI struggles to see? Okay, so my first panelist says, AI and its developers failed to see that all humanity's voices, hopes, and dreams should shape its future. And that panelist is Benjamin. Come on down. My second panelist says, AI does not see anyone, yet it is mediating human sight in ways that are fundamentally unequal. And that panelist is Ali-Reza. And my final panelist, well, she just said everyone. Huh? And that is Wakanyi. Please join me on stage. Okay, so let me turn around and get us settled in. We have three sort of guiding questions across rounds, and I want to start with the basics, right? So in my view, we are living, or enduring, a moment characterized by an obsession with making AI more intelligent. But intelligent for what, right? Different societies may have fundamentally different answers, not just to what intelligence is, but maybe even more importantly, what it's for, right? So my leading question here is, what is one assumption about the purpose of intelligence that your work challenges? And I'll give it to Benjamin first.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here. I'm going to answer your question in a slightly indirect way and say that humanity is awesome. But on its current trajectory, humanity has maybe only 5 to 7 years left. So I've spent the last decade trying to build a vast network of kind of tens of thousands of AI researchers across Africa, really out of the fear that the continent will be exploited by technology that's kind of built elsewhere and just imported. But I've realized more recently that we're all in the same boat in that regard. I mean, all these discussions in anywhere that's basically not the US and China at the moment is around our own sovereignty and so on. We're really facing a plethora of risks to humanity at the moment. And there's like infinitely many ways that things can pan out, but I don't see us doing any direct steering towards positive outcomes that we'd like to see. And I think at the core, this is driven by this weird kind of race dynamics that we've built around ourselves. The way that we've kind of set up our economies and the things that we care about, and that we're building this intelligence, which is something that kind of on its surface just adds value to whatever you throw it at in a kind of perhaps sometimes trivial way. But we've ended up in a situation where you've got countries racing against each other, companies racing against each other, all cutting whatever corners they possibly can to make sure that they can get there first, because each one is the best one to do it. And if they don't manage to do it, someone else will do it, and probably do it in a terrible, unethical way that will end the world. The one thing I just want to add to this quickly is that you can see how this is all panning out just by looking at the incentive structures. You look at the billions and now trillions of dollars that kind of the lead frontier AI labs are worth at the moment, and think about the investment that's been put into that. You're not going to invest in a company unless you're going to see a return on those investments. But if you kind of do the numbers, every single person on the planet having a subscription to these models does not recover that money. You only recover that money if you put large sectors of humanity out of work. And so we're building towards an anti-human future at the moment, and I think that's something that we desperately need to fix, as I say, in the next few years.
Well, thank you, Benjamin. Tell us how you really feel. I feel like, do we want to respond to that particular corner? Do you want to triangulate back to the larger question of what is intelligence for? Ali-Reza, I see like you've got an idea burning, so I'll just give it to you.
Thank you. So yeah, I appreciate the question and some of the shift in discussion we've had since yesterday towards thinking about the purpose of intelligence. And in particular for me, I'm concerned with the purpose of human intelligence, which in some ways has been a muted question until maybe our most recent speaker. So within the Islamic tradition, which is of course diverse, I didn't say diversity. No, you did. So you can click again.
We'll let it pass, but good catch.
Look, we have different conceptions of intelligence, and we had a range of conceptions shared yesterday. Many, for me, were deeply reductive, and presumed to be based on a materialistic view of the world. Within Islamic traditions, wider Abrahamic traditions, I think for Aristotle, ontology is a serious concern. But when we think about intelligence and the range of intelligences, of course I'm saying of course, within the Islamic tradition, I'd like to focus very, very briefly on what type of intelligence is valorized for humans, right? And principally within Islamic traditions, it's a deployment of reason, intelligence, the intellect, whichever, and these word choices matter, which give us ma'rifah, which give us understanding, which give us experience, which give us relationship to truth, or to existence qua existence, or if you like, to God. So the valorized intelligence is fundamentally ethical. The valorized human intelligence is fundamentally the seat of human responsibility, human capacity, human ethics. With the responsibility, there's two sides to the question of ethical responsibility. Also comes potential. And I feel very, very strongly in these conversations that we need to rethink and revisit our conceptions, plural conceptions, of human purpose. Without thinking about human responsibility, human ethics, we can't think about AI ethics.
Strong. Okay. Wakanyi, you want to back that up? You want to take it somewhere different?
I'll take it from there, and then I'll sort of circle back to the question about intelligence and who is it for. And to begin with, just to ground us on why we are here. Like, who are we as human beings? You know, the idea of ethics and all of that comes from, fundamentally, from our desire to understand why, purpose, what is our purpose, right? And so an intelligent system, I'll start from there, an intelligent system, at least from an Ubuntu perspective, must be able to accommodate for a diversity of ways of revealing how we care, how much we care about being human to begin with, and being part of living systems. So when we say a person is a person through other persons, and I said that earlier, what that actually means is that I care about my own existence, and I care about your existence, and together we care about the coexistence of everything that is living on the planet. So intelligence, an intelligent system actually reveals care. An intelligent system is relational intelligence made visible. And an intelligent system is also helping us continually repair and reciprocate that which makes us grow and evolve with the planet. So we cannot decouple our purpose, we cannot remove ourselves from the purpose of the Earth's purpose of evolving and replicating itself over time. I'll start from there.
Perfect. I think what I'm kind of getting is that notions of intelligence are not just about performance, and what we can see maybe is that the richness of our understanding of what intelligence is says a lot about our place vis-a-vis one another and also what we want from AI. And maybe there's a movement within, let's say, the major players in AI to have, as Ali-Reza might say, a reductive stance on what intelligence and even what it means to be human, right? And as a result, we're kind of flattening all of these human potentials, and along with it, a type of human responsibility that it appears to be not only a relational type where we acknowledge our mutual existence, but also that we would definitely need to face whatever's coming with AI, including some of the grand challenges that would sit, you know, in the near horizon from maybe 5 to 7 years. And so I want to keep this pin, and now I'm going to make it even more. I'm going to catastrophize a little bit, and I want to talk about, you know, basically, why are some answers to what intelligence is and what AI should be winning, and others don't even participate in the conversation? So can we talk maybe about the politics and power behind why AI is moving in the direction that it is, despite the fact that, I mean, you know, you talk to professionals as you talk to students or people on the street, most of them are unhappy with the way that AI is moving, even if they're curious and enthusiastic, perhaps, about its future potential, right? So I want to kind of dig into what you all think might be some of the mechanisms of power in politics as to why we have the current framing that we have today. And maybe this time I'll start with Ali-Reza.
So why are some winning? I think some of the responses are obvious, and you've already cited them: power, money, the accumulation of material purpose. So purpose being the accumulation of wealth, you know, capitalist logics. I think these are obvious superstructures. We heard about soft structures. I think these are hard structures which are being digitally encoded, yeah, into things which we passively consume or increasingly engaging with. But I'm not a political economist, and there's other people who are present, I'm sure, who are more equipped to speak about this. But I think another thing which has been missing, and why are some visions of a good life, because ultimately a capitalist system is a vision of a good life. right? Okay, people are seeing value in the accumulation and the pursuit of self-interest. States see value in the accumulation and preservation of self-interest. Corporations see value in the, in the ever-expansionist aspiration. So that's a worldview. But I think one of our challenges is that human failure, to appreciate deep difference. Okay, so we see plurality quite widely, even in our soft structures, as a problem to be managed, right? Plurality is to be governed, okay, or to be included, rather than being privileged, rather than difference and particularity as being an opportunity, to be cherished and to learn through and to learn with. So I think we need a fundamental repositioning of the way we engage with plurality.
And I think, I want to just reinforce that. I think the dominant idea from a political kind of policy-making level is that all we need to do to deal with diversity is just to include more stakeholders, right? To get the right voices, to get the right people in the room. We'll understand the differences, but we're all at the end of the day marching in the same direction. We're all, after the same goods, and our vision of the good life is not so distinct as to be incompatible, and if it is, they're wrong. And I think what you're what you're saying here, Ali-Reza, is really challenging that at this macro sort of level. Now, Benjamin, I know that you, with your background, would have maybe some things to say about, let's say, lock-in effects, but not only at the structural level, but also at the model level, down at the micro level when it comes to things like optimization, etc. Would you happen to enlighten us with that a little bit, please?
So kind of throughout the history of AI, we've always spoken about narrow versus general intelligence. And really until recently, the narrow intelligence was the easy thing, that you could pick a task and sure, there'd be a lot of work that's required, but we could build a system that could do the thing. Whether that was playing chess or doing a certain kind of very particular diagnostic or for a very particular kind of X-ray. But the kind of roots of the field are really in trying to understand the mind, that we've discussed from many different angles throughout this conference. And in recent times, this has been kind of the big breakthrough. This is the thing that's changed. The fact that you can take something like a large language model and it's able to be useful for a whole lot of different things. Now, at the core, you've still got to train your AIs to do a thing. And this comes down to having an objective, like a thing that we can measure when it's getting better or when it was worse, and we can kind of keep prodding it in the direction that's kind of a positive direction. But we need something objective to measure here. And so, there's always these kind of simple metrics that one follows. And they turn out to be usually things like your accuracy in predicting the next word that should have been predicted or something like that. You move to more sophisticated systems and you're looking at, are you producing outputs that a human is happy with, right? So there's typically some sort of metric that you've got to optimize for because the whole way that we train these models is optimization based. The kind of way that we then connect that up to the rest of society from the thing we're doing on a GPU in a lab somewhere is, we kind of benchmark these things. We say, how well is it doing? Well, to know how well it's doing, I'm not going to measure, does it have a good life? I'm going to measure how well does it do on a thing I care about. And those things might be the New York bar exam or various kind of standardized testing. And then that's become a whole kind of cottage industry. And we're reaching a point now where many of the model developers say, we've run out of interesting metrics to evaluate because we can beat humans on all the ones we care about. But this is interesting. This goes to what Ali-Reza was saying about like, what are we actually looking to measure, right? We've kind of bridged this chasm between kind of training a technical model using some very nice, elegant optimization techniques through to, hang on, here's a thing that's kind of coexisting around humans. And conveniently, we've been measuring ourselves by some very simple metrics for the last however many 100 years of, you know, how much money do you make or something like that. And so I think that naturally falls into the same kind of categories that if we're not careful, we just keep pushing in that direction. And the problem is this is what now the entire industry is built on. Because, again, if you're doing the whole fundraising thing, right, why is someone going to throw money at you? It's because they think they're going to get some money back out of it. And why do they think that? Well, it's because you're very good at doing a thing on Excel that's going to be worth some money. And like that's now a measurable quantity as well. And so it's really just fallen into a whole pattern of how we've built up our economy and how we think about work, more than how we think about ourselves and our lives and our happiness as these kind of easy to measure metrics that you can put on some KPIs and checklists.
Thank you. I think we're all kind of feeling the effects of that, but I think it's really interesting to look at it from a design perspective because, again, usually when we talk about diversity, in design, it has to do with data representativeness or something like that. But I think the problem of optimization, even at this small level, is super fascinating, and this distinction between narrow and general intelligence. Because as a philosopher, and then I'm going to go to you, Wakanyi, because I know you're going to have something to say about this. When we start to define what good means in the context of a narrow task like washing the dishes, it's easy for us all to agree on what that might look like. You shouldn't break the dishes, you know, you should do it quickly, maybe you shouldn't use too much water. Okay, and the cultural constraints and nuances behind dishwashing while existing are probably minimal and easy to detect, right? You don't have to do too much detective work for that. Whereas, when we start to want to design machines not only that do many things, including many interactive relational things, but also are kind of deployed everywhere for everything, I think the question of what good behavior becomes, which is to a certain extent the alignment question, but also the question of cultural expectation, is really difficult, if not, from my perspective as a philosopher, intractable, right? To do that well, right? So I wonder if you have a hot take on that, Wakanyi, and if you disagree, why?
I think you mentioned it earlier before we came onto the stage, where you were talking about how so many different languages are not represented, and those languages reveal context. They reveal the way in which different cultures have different needs, right? And so when you're looking at the AI models as they currently are, everything that we put into the LLM, any question, any prompt or whatever, is still funneled through this particular worldview, which is, you know, others have written about it, sort of the Western, industrial, educated, weird.
Weird.
That's what it's called, yeah. And I think we're all weird anyway, to some degree, because we've been trained in that way of thinking. And so from that perspective, the bias is already coded in the design. So I'm not even sure that it's possible to undo that particular kind of harm. And maybe some of you might disagree or think differently. But I think the larger question is, from a design perspective, and I sit with designers in different companies all the time, and I ask this question: are you designing for a solution in which you also share in the problem? In the sense that, are you related to the problem itself that you're trying to solve? Because only if that problem is also affecting you somewhat directly, and if you think about it, obviously any problem in the world should affect all of us. But there has to be some kind of relationship between you and the problem that you're trying to solve in order for you to understand different ways in which the solution might actually create more problems. If you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, for example, one elder in Uganda recently said to me, are the sustainable goals sustainable in and of themselves? So the question of even what is sustainability, we've not defined that. We've defined it in a very narrow, particular world view. But if you talk to people all across indigenous communities, sustainability is an everyday experience. It's not a goal to get to. So there's something there that is wrong with the particular view of the world that has enabled for these LLMs to grow in the way that they are currently growing, or, growing, being clawed, or being shaped from the get-go, from the design.
Okay, that's so fascinating. And I think, okay, Benjamin wants to take it, and then I also have a follow-up, so go ahead.
Cool. I want to challenge something in the framing of the question, actually. When you said, maybe it's easy to specify kind of washing dishes. I think that is one of the challenges, is task specification. And so, we often think like, you could say to, someone else just stack the dishwasher. But the problem is when you're trying to instruct a machine and it's not embodied in the same way as you. It doesn't have the same worldview. It's not just a case of do the thing. It's like stack the dishwasher. No, don't do it like that. No, don't put those things in there. No, clean that dish first, right? And don't drop things and don't smash stuff. And it's very much a case of, no, that's not what I meant. And this is a big problem that actually leads to the alignment problem, and in fact leads to, it was one of the conditions leading to kind of the paperclip maximizer that we heard about earlier. It's often joked about, but really as like the technical field that I work in called reinforcement learning, which is really about learning behaviors. I mean, literally all of my students kind of on a regular basis have this case of, sorry, I couldn't get this result done in time because my robot was still killing people. And that's like, fundamentally, it's so hard to specify these objectives that if you kind of play things out, it's, the caricatures are very much, and in fact, just one case, a colleague of mine took his robot vacuum cleaner and wanted to speed it up. And said, okay, I'm going to reward you for going as fast as possible, but penalize you whenever you detect that you're about to hit something, because obviously I don't want it smashing into things. And so what it learned to do was go backwards as fast as possible, because it had no sensors on the back, and so it could never realize it was about to hit something. This is the problem, that these things are excellent optimizers, and if you're not saying absolutely exactly the correct thing, it's just going to take you at your word and try and like hit those targets, literally in this case. And that's what we've got to be careful of.
Yeah, I think that's a really important nuance, and I'm happy that you checked me. I'm a big believer, well, I mean, there's classical problems and even good old-fashioned AI, like ceteris paribus reasoning and the frame problem, right? So again, the problem of task specification, I definitely agree that it's real. And it's interesting to see that it's still such a hot topic, even though we have such powerful, all-encompassing models that are meant to be able to understand and do everything, and who are we to challenge them? Because it's, and maybe also, when you see the evolution of where AI is going right now, this move from a pure language-based approach to a more physical AI approach, this is to tacitly accept that there's a type of embodied intelligence that's lacking in the types of models that we have today, which I think harkens back a little bit more to kind of what we're trying to circle here, that there's a larger, more complex picture to take into account. But I do want to come back to your brilliant way of putting things, Wakanyi, because when you ask, are you related to the problem you're trying to solve? I think that is such, I'm going to steal that. I'm going to post that on social media. I really think that is such a great question, and I want to just get some impulses from the panelists now. No big talks, just first thoughts. On whether you think that the thought leaders behind all of the major tech players actually feel concerned by any of our human problems, or are they not somehow a little bit convinced that we're all just a simulation or something like that? I'll let you guys fight over it.
I'm I think it's hard to say what's going on in someone's head. And there's clearly some interesting characters leading the development of this technology. I'm choosing my words wisely here. But even, you know, there's been a lot of talk from all of them around, you know, we need to be regulated. And, you know, a lot of that is taken with a lot of skepticism, and I think for good reason, but I also think there's something to it, because, you know, what I was saying earlier about this race dynamic, this kind of game theoretic condition we find ourselves in, no player in a game can unilaterally change the rules. And I think they all realize that we're in a race to the bottom at the moment, and unless someone does something about it, we've got a problem. I've been working with the Vatican, for example, because we're looking at, we need some moral leadership to step in, be able to bring all the kind of correct players in the game to the table and change the rules. But also there's clearly other things driving them. Like, you know, you might care about humanity, but maybe becoming a trillionaire is pretty cool too. I don't know how those things trade off in certain people's minds.
We'll find out. Ali-Reza?
Yeah, so, you know, your question of, so if we see the leaders of the tech companies as a problem, I'm not related to them, you know, unfortunately, or fortunately. But I want to spin it to thinking about this really productive position of how we're, you know, are we related to the problem? And I would like to suggest that we might reframe that further. In the spirit of privileging difference, right? And you know, how are we related to the challenges rather than the problems? Because if we see the deployment of technology, you know, as that we have aspirations and we're being sold technologies, and many of us may believe that these technologies really can solve climate crisis and can solve the challenges of an aging population, for example, in Europe. What does that solving look like? So in this sense, how are we related to that solving? Right? So if we have a technological solution to the climate crisis, how has that impacted my relationship to the climate? Right? So if I devolve, okay, my relationship to the climate to a technological solution, okay, where has my flourishing come about? Has it been a fulfillment of human purpose? So in the example of care, which I've given before elsewhere, that if we solve, I feel shy and ashamed to call it the problem of an aging population. But that's how it's framed, okay? Yeah, if I solve my responsibilities or duties of care, whether it's to elders or whether it's to children, okay, through the deployment of technologies, what have I done to my potential to be a caregiver? So in this thing, I think we really need to be related to our challenges and think about their impacts on human development, human purpose or purposes, and human flourishing.
So Ali-Reza, just to kind of push back on that, like, you know, I think much as there's a lot to worry about, like AI does promise a lot of benefits. And, you know, one of our significant advantages as humans is to be able to come up with solutions that extend beyond what we do, like physically as an individual. Like going back through like the agricultural revolution, you know, mass producing food frees up other people to do things. So Demis Hassabis, who leads Google Research, is probably of the big tech leaders the least prone to overstatement. And he talks about, you know, within a few years we can maybe cure all cancers. Now, this feels to me like, I don't think I would be ashamed that AI has cured cancer, because that relieves me of my duty to look after, you know, palliative care family members, right? So I think we've got to be careful with how we choose these examples. I think the calling of humans should be greater than to run around putting out fires. And and I'm sure Aristotle had a lot to say about this kind of thing. But you know, I think defining ourselves in relation to how we deal with things that are really unfortunate, I think there's greater ways that we could think about our own value and what it is to be.
Okay, I think that there's some convergence in what both of you are saying, but what I'm really interested in now is what Wakanyi is going to say.
Thank you so much. And I'll leave you two to go and fight it out later. We'll have... So let me just, throw in a few statistics here. So Africa, right? 1.5 billion people live on the continent right now. By the year 2030, 1 in 4 people on the planet will be of African descent. That's more than 6,000 languages spoken. Diversity, if we're talking about diversity. So the point I'm trying to make is those 6,000 languages can reveal the problems that Africa is facing today. If we took seriously the question of language, natural language in AI, that's not possible at the moment, right? Now, why is it that, and I've sat in some of those companies, Anthropic being one of the better ones, I would say, why is there such a reluctance to open up that space to understand what the actual problems are on the African continent by these bigger companies? Why is it that we've been speaking about small language models, small contextual models that can solve specific problems, so small task-specific AI tools that can solve specific problems, and that can open up this wider conversation around AI development in Africa, innovation. The question here is also how we define who is innovative, who has innovative solutions. But the bigger problem also is that we don't really want to understand what the problems are. And that's why it comes back to the question, do we want to solve the Sustainable Development Goals problems, or do we want to keep replicating the problems because we don't have the solutions, because we're not related? So for me, at the end of the day, that question of relationality is key to us understanding what the problem is on the ground. And the only way to get to that is by diversifying, that's a different word, diversifying the field, the space within which these problems can be made visible. And that is how we make care visible. We have to relate. There's just no other way. And so the person sitting at Silicon Valley might think that they understand the problem on the African soil. But until you have actually a relationship with people on the ground, you really can't truly understand what it feels like to be that person sitting in Samburu land in Kenya, whose land is going to be taken over by data centers and then thrown into the city where they've never lived before. You really can't understand that unless you have had a lived experience with these particular people. And so understanding that, revitalizing indigenous languages, bringing those languages into a space where they can be treated as equal as other languages would help us understand what the actual problem is on the ground.
That's super interesting. I like that there's a linguistic component as an enabling condition of even the will to want to address that problem. And I think that is so correct and prescient. And probably there's so many other examples of that across different regions in the world. I mean, even in the French example, which is maybe less exotic to what the Silicon Valley gods might imagine, but we struggle really quite a lot actually to have models that are capable of, producing language and interacting in a way that actually suits the French context with all of its rules and particularities, right? So even next door to where a lot of this is happening, it's already linguistically stunted, let's say.
Can I say something about the language point?
Sure.
So a few years ago, with a few people, I co-founded an African languages startup called Lalapa AI that came out of this Pan-African movement. We'd started the deep learning in Dabo. We grew out a kind of grassroots network called Masakane that does African language research. And now this is, there's a few startups in the space. And in fact, that general movement has been successful in even getting Google to push out some African languages into their models, which has been amazing to see, because if you can't communicate with technology, you don't get any of the benefits of this. And to me, this is really the key in getting people in all communities engaged in tech development. Now, a lot of the funding in the space goes towards, we need Africans to be collecting data and putting it online, which is so exploitative. I'm not even going to start with that. But like, to be able to develop the technologies based on the demands on the ground, based on the needs of the people, based on the opportunities, and like in every different part of the world. And I think it's even a broader question that there's hard problems like things around AI safety that maybe are only hard because we're looking at it from a Silicon Valley perspective and not bringing different philosophies from different parts of the world. And again, by enabling this community, you can actually make these things happen.
Thank you. And I do think that that's interesting to think about some of the pressing questions in AI ethics and safety, and how much they also reflect all sorts of assumptions that are probably not true for most people. We are almost out of time, so I just want to do a final little blitz to give each of my panelists an opportunity to kind of answer the question, AI will truly be for and from all the people when, and like, let's keep it shorter than a tweet. So I'm going to start with Wakanyi, no pressure.
When it includes more women in the technology, women's knowledge and...
Okay.
When we reconsider our vision of human purpose and human purposes.
Benjamin.
When we can stop the existential race and give people space to actually flourish.
All right, folks, we have a diverse panel and a diverse set of ideas. So I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you so much for your patience and attention.